Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Filmmakers Flow. I'm your host, Denzel, and this is episode 7. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus. I took I think a 2-week break, roughly, around the 4th of July weekend, and then that week after that, just kind of take a moment to reset. But I am ready to hop back into the podcast. I'm going to probably have, I'm gonna, at some point, release like a posting schedule because I will be taking breaks throughout the year, and then going forward, the podcast won't be ongoing indefinitely, but like I will essentially have like a schedule each year of how many episodes, like what we're doing. So that's probably something I'll try to make pretty soon here. But until I say that there's no podcast coming for like a couple of weeks, you can expect that when you see episodes, it's generally weekly, and I take like a 2-week break here and there. But that's kind of the flow that I'm going for right now. But yeah, I'm ready to get back into it and get some more episodes rolling because I really enjoy this podcast, and hopefully you do as well. So with the Filmmakers Flow podcast, for those who are joining us for the first time or new, I gear a lot of the information I talk about towards indie filmmaking, student filmmakers, people who are new to this. Not that you can't get anything out of it if you've been in it for a long time, but a lot of this information I'm talking about right now is more like, beginner level to people who have been doing it, but probably not at like a super high level, but like we're on our way. We're going for that. So as someone who has been doing filmmaking for a long time and who is now definitely pushing a lot more to do it even at a higher level than I've done it, this is like kind of like where we are at right now. So, just take that with a grain of salt when you're listening to the podcast. If that's not for you, then, cool. But if it is, I'd love to have you, and thank you for being here. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into what we're talking about today. And that is how to save money, or like where you can save money on a independent or a indie film. And this could apply for features and short films. It doesn't have to, this isn't like specific to short films, and honestly you can do a lot of this stuff for feature films as well, or whatever you're shooting. But I like to talk about cameras here, but I like to talk about, not that cameras don't matter, because that definitely is something that I think is said, and it's said very loosely, but camera shouldn't be the focus. Like, it shouldn't be the end all be all. Because if you only look at the camera and you don't consider anything else, then that's like, what are you really doing? That's not the how good your camera is or what the resolution is on your camera. That doesn't determine whether or not you're going to have a good story. So that's that's kind of like the angle that's my viewpoint on it, and the angle that I'm always taking. I'm just referring to my notebook here, but yeah, so let's talk about the camera. So that's one spot I would say you can definitely save money, that you don't have to put resources toward, assuming you have limited funds or no funds. Assuming you have a camera already, I would just use whatever camera you have. And I say even if it's a phone, use that. Phones have gotten to the place now to where you can definitely get a clean image. You're gonna have some limitations on the things you can achieve with a phone, but in all honesty, phones have progressed so far. And I definitely was a person who was very slow to that train of thinking. Like and I still am very much team camera over a phone. I would much rather shoot, especially narrative, on my on like an actual camera versus a phone. But phone cameras really have improved to a point to where you really can get some good footage, and it's not like the craziest thing in the world to say. It's not like, oh, okay, you're gonna shoot that. Like, no, you actually could, and it may not be the image you want, but what I'm getting at is if you're looking for places to save money and you're doing an independent film, that honestly is not going to be something that's going to keep you from doing it. I'm not saying, because I definitely don't believe that cameras are as good as a cinema, that I don't believe that a phone camera is as good as a cinema camera. And that's not what I'm saying, nor is that even important. But what I'm getting at is that if that's what you have already, you have a camera, so you can shoot. So now let's focus on some other areas that will definitely elevate your film to a higher level, even more so than having the best camera on the market would. Because adding these things without having, because having the best camera on the market without doing some of the other things I'm going to talk about really won't elevate you more than shooting on an iPhone would, or Samsung, whatever phone you got. So yeah, that's the viewpoint for as far as cameras go. The other thing I would say is locations. I think that's another spot people like to try to like spend money on and like go all out with these cool locations. And for sure, good locations, look really cool on camera. But what I would suggest, and like what I've always done, is I will write the story I'm telling around the location I have access to, and really you want a location that's free, or that you have, you can spend a very small amount of money to use. I think that it's more important to have a location that you have access to than picking a location just because it looks cool. Again, everything I'm talking about, you have to take with a grain of salt. Because if you're trying to tell a story that is predicated on a specific location, then you already know, okay, you have to spend your money on that, and then you have to find other areas to cut. Okay, but you have to I can't tell you that that's the right or wrong answer. I'm just saying, if you're wanting to do a story or wanting to make a film and the location and the story you want to tell isn't predicated on the location per se, or you can make it work in a location you have access to, I would strongly suggest doing that, because you're going to save yourself a lot of time and money. If you have access to a location already, you're saving yourself, time in terms of hunting for locations. You're saving yourself money for having to rent that location, having to get permits to shoot there and permission and whatever the other case may be. For example, the most recent thing I shot for a project I'm working on was here in my apartment. So I didn't have to ask anybody permission. It's just me and my wife. And it's, I'm like, hey, what days, like, do you have something going on? Checking with her, make sure our schedules are good. So yeah, no, that's cool. So I'm like, all right, cool. This weekend, I'm going to use the living room. I have a bunch of people over and we'll be shooting this project in my house. But it's my house, and I made it work based on the story. And the story took place in the house. So that's how I conceived the story. So it worked out, so that's, if the location is something that you can be flexible on, definitely choose a spot that you have access to, because that's somewhere that's one solid place. It's kind of fun, like, no pun intended on that one, but that's a solid area that you can cut back on, and just allocate resources elsewhere. Something else you could try to do is, actors, reaching out to friends, family, people who have interest in acting. If you're in film school, a lot of times when I was in film school, a lot of, me and my classmates, we would go to like the acting department or the theater, kids, they always were down to do stuff. They did theater primarily, but they were always in like stage acting, but they were down to be in film projects that we were doing. And you still can, even people out, like, there's a lot of people who maybe do acting part-time and they're trying to build up their reels and things like that. So you could also reach out to people who actually do acting too. But I would say, friends and family, people who look good on camera. If the role isn't something that's like super heavy, like you're like, if it's a role that you say, yeah, I can coach this person into playing this role, and it's not something that's going to require somebody who has like a crazy amounts of range or anything like that, then I would say go for it. Reach out to friends, reach out to family. If you have access to actors who are willing to work with you, then perfect. And I know that I've worked with actors who I didn't necessarily have to, pay them, and they were down to work with me and things like that. I try not to take advantage of that, but sometimes some actors are. If you talk to them and you can ask people, and I just throw out the friends and family because that's probably the easiest to talking to doing a project, or doing something like this for free and volunteering their time to help you. So, again, take all these things with a grain of salt, because you may have more resources and more access in this area than someone else might. And with all these things I'm touching on, this may be applied. Maybe you say, hey, I actually own a studio already. So you're good on location. Or, hey, I have a whole friend group of people who act and they all owe me favors. Whatever the case may be, your network and your resources better than I do. This is just, a blanket generalization on things you can think about. But it helps get you into the mindset too as well. So let's see what else I got on my list here. The other thing oh yes, this is a big one. Cinematography. So this is one area, and I've heard other filmmakers talk about this, especially when you're doing indie films and indie projects. Cinematography is definitely an area that you can cut on, and I'm not saying to make the project look bad. I know cinematography is one of the ones that we want to look the prettiest, but it also, not only can it burn a lot of money and resources because of what you need, but it takes a lot of time. And this is an area where you definitely can get away with less, but still, come away looking with something that looks good, assuming you're shooting on a camera that has, decent or to good quality. Most phones, most cameras, honestly, you can really get away with doing a lot of stuff with natural light. And that would be my biggest suggestion. If it's possible, shoot the entire film natural with natural lighting, because you're saving and I think everyone knows this, but like, you're saving yourself time where you're not having to set up the lights. It's a lot easier to just kind of, especially if it's like, you can, adjust your settings in your camera to make it, to account for whatever's going on with the sun outside. That's a great way to save not only money, but time, and you can get things done faster. And if you had to pay people, maybe you can pay them less because you don't have to have them out there for as long. Things like that, Something else I would say is, if you have to shoot in an area where you need a light, try to do one light setups. Sorry if you can hear the siren in the background. You might not hear it. I'm not sure if this mic going to pick it up or not, but sorry if you do hear it. But yeah, so that's an area where you can really save yourself, like I said, time and money, because I was talking about the light. Sorry. The siren distracted me. But yeah, the light. One light source if possible. So like, if you have to light it, like lean into like a moody lighting setup, which also could help, because if you're lighting a smaller area and you're not throwing lights everywhere, you can kind of hide certain things too. Like maybe the fact that the setting that you're in isn't exactly perfect, but you can kind of lean into some more moody lighting and more cinematic look, cinematic air quotes. Cause like, if you shoot like with one light source and you got like this shadow, like, you got this crazy, shadowy look going on. There's certain things you do and it's like, oh man, if you shoot on like on the fill side versus shooting on the key side of somebody's face, that automatically creates depth, which then makes your image look more, air quotes, cinematic, because you just have more, what's the word, contrast. You have more, it's not as flat. I think that's the word I was looking for. It's not as flat. You're creating some three-dimensionality, if that's even a word, into this 2D image that, flat screen. You want to try to create depth that's not actually there, It's a whole visual thing. It's a whole sleight of hand. But yeah, so that's just my thing. Obviously, if you or like, no, I really need to have these lights for this reason. And, you know your situation. But again, this is an area that is possible to save money on because films can be shot completely. You could make your film take place outside in exteriors, or make sure that in any scenes you shoot inside, make sure you do it during the day and you shoot close to windows. Because I mean, a lot of films, look really good. You see a lot of films shoot natural light, and sometimes a lot of that is simulating natural light. But all I'm getting at is that it's a great way to, I don't know how many other ways I can say it, but it's a great way to save time and money. So yeah. Oh yeah, the other thing I want to talk about with cinematography is not to do any complicated camera moves. You can get creative without having to do a whole bunch of, complex jib movements. And people made films back in the day before we had all the different gimbals and things that made your camera move. Sometimes cameras were locked down on sticks. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do anything creative. I'm just getting at it's possible. You don't have to lock in your mind, oh, I gotta go buy a gimbal, or I gotta have a slider, or man, I have to have a drone, or I gotta get a jib so I can do these crazy crane shots. If the story calls for it, and that's one thing. But if you can get around it, definitely work that into your script. Work into where it's like, hey, the camera movement we're going to do it on stick. So it's going to be on tripod. We're going to have panning motions, tilts, things like that. Go handheld. You can do those things. If you want to have like a dolly in effect, my suggestion, if you're shooting 4K or 6K or 8K or whatever the case may be, shoot at higher resolution than you're planning on delivering, and you can push that in post. So you can like crop in on the image. I know it's not, there are going to be purists who will be like, no, a dolly is not the same as a digital zoom or like a digital punch in. And 100% I agree with you. But it's just ways to help those of us who may be working with a smaller budget or don't have the resources we need. Maybe you're shooting by yourself too, and you're acting in your own project, and you're not able to put your camera on a slider or on a dolly. That's an easy way to create some cinematic motion in post. Something else you could do is if you're going to use handheld motion, which also kind of helps with speed, you pick the camera up and just go. Assuming that you're somewhat steady and that the camera isn't shaking all crazy all over the place, you can use stabilization in post, and warp stabilizer in Premiere, and then DaVinci Resolve has stabilization built into it that you can use. Those work. I mean, obviously you can push it to where it starts looking crazy and be looking like super. It won't look organic, or it'll look very like artificial. But assuming that you aren't pushing it too crazy, you can use that to help. So these are things we can like use and lean on. And I'm not saying to make it a crutch that you're going to do this forever, but it's just to help you get going. And one day you'll be able to afford all the great fancy equipment. But right now you may not be able to afford all those things, but you still can be creative, and you still can get your vision out even on a budget. And it's just different ways to help you and, to get your gears turning. Cause I'm throwing these examples out, but you can come up with a whole bunch of other ones. And as a matter of fact, even while you're watching now, you can drop a comment on other ways you can think of that would help someone save money when it comes to some of the things I've listed, or completely different ones if you have them as well. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, so those are things that I was saying that, ways you can cut back and ways you can actually not spend money at all. But let's just say you have cut back on all these areas, but you do have some money. So, and you want to be able to use that for the film. So these are the things that I would start in, I would say a ranking area of priority. This is where I would spend money if I have some money to spend. Production design. I think I talk about production design so much. I feel like I have mentioned production design in every episode. That might not be true, but I think I have. But it's so important because to me, the thing about production design is it breathes life into your scene. it sells the world that you're telling, that you're showing. It sells the world. It makes it believable. And that from production design, set dressing, I'll throw costumes in there. I mean, those are different departments, but these are all things that will appear on camera that play into that. That kind of leads also into the other thing that I would do. This wouldn't be number one, but assuming that I have budget, the next thing I would go to would be hair and makeup. And the thing about that is you can get away with it. And I've done this a lot where I'll have actors do their own hair and do their own makeup, because a lot of actors can, especially if you have, if you have, women who are acting in your project, and women would normally do their own hair and makeup from day to day anyway. And I think a lot of men who act probably have some experience with putting on some form of makeup and things like that too. And then maybe you can get people to help with that. But that's an area that if I had it, after production design and after costume and after props and things that are going to be seen and interacted with within this world to make it believable, I would love to be able to do hair and makeup, because for me, the whole thing is making your image consistent. And if you have a solid, consistent looking image, that already elevates your film to such a high level, more so than shooting on a super good camera. Because if you shot on a super good camera and you have costume wardrobe issues, people's hair looks one way in one shot and it's completely different somewhere else, and then like the people's skin is not flattering, and there's inconsistencies, and this world is definitely not believable, and you just put your actors into this blank room that has no type of design or any type of appeal to it, and the world you've created, the scene you created feels lifeless. I don't care how good the camera is, that's not going to make it look like a movie. That's not going to make it believable or elevated. So yeah, those are the things I would say I would go to first. The other thing that I would definitely go to would be if you have to have, if your subject matter is to the point to where it requires skilled actors, then I would say, like, if you can afford to pay for actors, that's probably a good spot to do it. Assuming, like I said before, you probably really can find people who are willing to work with you and even work with you for free. But let's just say, for example, you need to spend money on a name. So like you got like somebody who is known to some degree, but you got to pay them. I think that's a worthwhile investment if having this person attached to your film, because they have a name, they have name recognition, and it can help sell tickets and help promote your film because of who they are, then that's kind of ties into marketing in a sense. So if it makes sense for you, if it's necessary, then cool. That's where that would be the next thing that I would try to go to. I wouldn't make that my first thing though, unless your story really requires that person. And if you're just in the beginning, I'm assuming most likely not. So you really can probably get away with it. But if you know people who are, maybe local actors, but, they need some money, and they do this professionally, even if they're not like a super known actor, they could just be a working actor. Still, if you have the money and you are needed in that type of tier, talented, someone who actually does this as a job, then that's this area I would say for sure go for it if that's something that is required for your film. Let's see. So another area that I would touch on would be, so this is going to depend on your film and what you're doing, but I would put money into marketing. If you need to sell, it really just depends on what you're doing though. And it depends on your skill set and what you don't already know how to do. So if you need some help with design for posters or you want to make an ad or something. But I was thinking more on lines of like maybe like a film festival, because sometimes people will do films that they need to get them into festivals and things. That's an area, for festival submissions. That's somewhere like I would reserve funds for that. But you would know that you're going to do that before you're making your film, so you can kind of, allocate that into the budget. But that's just something I would consider, after the fact. There might be some things based on what your goal is for the film. If you're just going to make the film and post it on YouTube, and maybe you're going to be more organic, word of mouth, then this wouldn't really be necessary in this case. So assuming you don't really need to do that, the other thing I would say, and honestly, you probably really should do this one first, but you would have to decide for you. But it would have to do with post production and like any music that you're planning on using. So whether you're trying to license music, so money for that, or if you need to get access to like a sound library, like a music library. And then, there's when you're doing, based on how you're doing your distribution, you may have to pay certain licensing for the rights to use that track of music for whatever type of distribution that you're doing. So that's something to consider and think about. People don't really, I really don't ever hear people talk about that, honestly, when they talk about making films, but that is something you have to consider. Is what type of music you're going to be using. You might not be using music, but even if you're, getting music from a sound library that you have a subscription to, depending on how you're doing distribution, could depend on if you need to pay some money to be able to use, to get the proper licensing to use it in whatever way you're wanting to use that music. And that can be, and I would also say for sound effects too, things like that. Assuming you're editing your own project. If you're going through somebody else, it could be different. They probably have access to stuff. But these are just things I'm just throwing out to think about that aren't the norm YouTube flashy things that people talk about. This is stuff that I would say, oh yeah, maybe I would put my money toward those things, because I feel like these are things that will actually help elevate it, like having good music, having a good score. Even if that's paying someone to do music for you, to actually create original music. So to me, these are things that will actually elevate the production value of your film and elevate the film to another level, more so than just buying a camera would. Things like that, or more so than, oh, this location looked really cool. Like, there's things that go into it that really breathe life into a film, like music, like production design and costumes and props, wardrobe, the realism, like in terms of hair and makeup. Do these people look like the people who would be in this world? Do they look like people you just grabbed off the street and just asked to just be in front of the camera, or is this actually all one cohesive thing? So yeah, at the end of the day, you're gonna have to be the one who answers the question on what things you actually need to put your resources to. Where do you need to spend your money? That's only you can answer that question. But hopefully, the list that I made helps you to think outside of the box and not just be focused on like the big ticket items like a camera, or I have to get this location, or hire this super crazy talented, super expensive cinematographer to make my film look pretty, things like that. Those are all nice. And if you have the resources to do all of these things, then that is awesome. That is amazing. And you should go for it. And my hope and prayer for everybody watching this would be that you would be able to get to that level, and that you can be the person who has the resources to be able to do all of these things. But as we're still building in our careers and we're still growing, these are just some areas that you can think about. I don't want to look at it as cutting corners, but just saving money and reallocating funds for areas of importance, because you want to be able to invest in your film and make your film hopefully profitable. But if for nothing else, you want to use your money to make your film as good as it can be on a level that you're on right now. So the question of the week is going to just tie right back into what we've been talking about. What is an area that you think that filmmakers can save money on or get creative with, that a lot of times we don't think about? It's like, like I said, we talk about those big things, the obvious things, the YouTube clicky thumbnail things, things that everyone talks about. But what are some areas that you think that filmmakers don't have to spend money on, that you can save money, and what are some areas that you think would be better uses for that money, in your opinion. But that is all I have for this week. Thank you for joining me. And as always, until next time, just make sure you get out there and shoot something. No excuses.